All right, good morning. Welcome back here to Trader Minute. Great to have you aboard. Market off to another sluggish start here this morning. We did see, a gap down get bought into yesterday, but another kind of, just flat open and then, sell pressure come in initially. We're seeing a little buy pressure come in here since that, but a lot of sector differentiation. Yesterday we saw semiconductor stocks really weak, and today they're the strength, right? On the heels of some upgrades, one specifically for Micron, and has Micron flying high here today. This is one that was on the downside crossover list yesterday, right? And I just show that just so as a reminder that hey, those crossover lists, that's all they are, right? We need a crossover to create a trigger, but a crossover doesn't create a trigger. Right, and it's one of those where we do see this quite often on stocks that are making higher highs and higher lows, where downside crossover, does see upside action off it. Now, obviously, normally not to this degree, and this is catalyzed by that upgrade, and helping to lift the entire sector. The SMH, which had a downside crossover on it yesterday here as well. So for the challenge, have Disney on the board, and Disney is trading above its stop level here, and about 50 cents above its stop level. Disney's an interesting one. We did see it, flux below the stop yesterday, but the times I was on video, it was slightly above, so stayed in the position. A little gap, today, nothing, too dramatic here with it. But we come on to Disney's red stop day here today. And, this is one where we're red in the option, so, red in the stock as well. So, need to pull it off at the close today, as long as it's below the, or options in the red below our entry level here. So it's one where, could it rally $1.50, from here? It could. It'd be nice to see. But this is also one that's in a very interesting spot, right? And one where we're going to see a lot of stocks on the challenge watch list in this position. And it's one where we saw a downside crossover on the 3 and the 7 yesterday. But if you look at where the 3 and the 7 are right now, the 3 is still below the 7, right? The 3 on a little rally here, right? It would need a little bit of a rally, about 10 to 20 cents. That would push the 3 back above the 7. Now, a crossover of the 3 above the 7 doesn't inherently create a trigger, but we could see a trigger created, with that, or the other elements this afternoon, basically come in and be a trigger. So we'll be in an interesting spot with it, if we do see a rally. So we'll have to deal with that. We've dealt with that once before. And the last time we dealt with it, I just dealt with it by holding on to the option and changing the exit dates. But may have to deal with it a little bit differently here with Disney, just given the cash allocations, that are out there in the upcoming earnings for Disney as well, and the option that we are currently in. So we'll see how it plays on out here. Ideally, we'll get a $1.50 rally and don't have to worry about it, and can go from there. But that's probably wishful thinking on a day like today. And, so we'll manage as we get into the close. Now, there are no new signals on the board here this morning. It is one where we do have some crossovers out there. Let me show them to you. Let's come into the upside crossovers. You'll notice most of these stocks were on the downside list yesterday. CSX, Kohl's, Micron, Twitter, right? Playing that, downside upside game here with them. Kohl's is one that, we saw that strong downside move. What was that on Thursday? And I had mentioned I was surprised it didn't trigger a bear signal. Well, you kind of see what's happened since. It's just seen rally here since. CSX is one where we've seen it kind of dipping up and down, up and down. Today, starting to break out above the recent highs. If CSX were to close, at a new short-term high here, it would be its highest high since November. We probably see some pretty strong continuation on that. I'm not sure if it'll qualify as a challenge trigger, and even if it does, chances are very slim I'll be able to play it for the challenge, simply because earnings are very soon here for CSX. Let me get the exact date. The 16th, right? So they're 9 days away. So to be able to trade that is going to be very difficult here with CSX. But, very nice looking chart with everything that has gone on. So those are the upside crossovers. The downside crossovers out there today, let me show them to you here. You can see it's pretty long list, right? A lot of these were on this list yesterday, but rallied into the close, so they didn't have the downside crossover. You can see an oil play, Chevron. We see the emerging market ETF, the Brazilian ETF with some downside crossovers, Home Depot, Honeywell, Intel, which is not rallying with the rest of the sector here today. Is weakening with the rest of that sector here. And then we finally get seeing some downside crossover action in the banks. The banks, we talked about them at the end of last year. I'd like to be involved in the banks, but I need a pullback to be involved in the banks. So far, these haven't been, big enough pullbacks for me to be interested from an investment side. From a trade side, yeah, if we get a trigger, I'll run with it. But, interesting action there. We have Honeywell, which, this is the same chart as Disney Starbucks was essentially on Thursday, right? And we've seen kind of what they have done, these kind of, bigger companies. We just saw the missile strike, and it's just been pretty much downside pressure since. Nothing, too egregious, but, not something you want to see. And if you want to see if you're in on the upside there. So those are the crossovers in the market here today, and I am holding on to Disney here. You can see, and sorry, I pulled up the chart here just because it was on the corner of my eye, but you can see that the 3-day moving average has now crossed above the 7-day moving average. Now, again, I don't know if that's a trigger yet. We'll see kind of how it looks this afternoon. But, it is something that could, materialize into a trigger. And, we'll address it when or if and when that occurs. Now, this morning, I wanted to do a quick run through of the watch list for the challenge. And I'm not going to comb through, each and every stock here. But, we'll kind of show you where some of these are at, because it's not every day that a stock can create a trigger, right? Even if I want to trade it, it's not like it can create a trigger, because the first thing we have to see is a 3-7 crossover, right? If that doesn't happen, it's not going to create a trigger. And that, 3-7 crossover, that 3-day moving average, that 7-day moving average, that is the trigger. Now, it doesn't mean it's a signal, but, the other filter elements all come into play when that trigger happens, right? And so you can see something like an American Airlines, right? No trigger here. We see the 3 well below the 7, right? So the next crossover would be what? The next crossover would be to the upside, right? We can't get a new downside crossover. And so the next possible play on this would be upside. And you can kind of see it's not going to happen today. It's going to take a few days to materialize if it does. So, nowhere really close to being a signal. Apple has kind of been in this same position where the 3 has been above the 7. And for as much as I like Apple and want to play Apple, I want to be on the upside in Apple, I simply can't. There's no fresh 3-7 crossover there. Amazon, this is one that, had that beautiful action into the end of the year. Just beautiful upside, big rally, and it's held on here very nicely. But, nowhere close to a 3-7 crossover to the upside. So I can be as bullish as I want on Amazon, but no entry point here for it. where it sits right now, and there are quite a few of those, as there always are. But here's Boeing. Boeing, this is one that we had a crossover the other day, and I was hoping it would trigger a signal because I want to play it. But coming off of this same low, it did not trigger there. The consolidation risk was simply too high. But still something I like, but not anything close to giving a trigger there. Baba in the same position as Apple, right? Where just not going to give that crossover. Now, one area that I would very much like to play into the upside has finally had some downside 3-7 crossover action. That hey, on the next 3-7 upside, we could see a trigger come into play. And so Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, heck, even Caterpillar, could be on the table there. If we start to see some things, rally here. In a little bit. We have a lot of these energy names like ConocoPhillips, Halliburton. They've had the upside 3-7 crossovers. If you'll recall last challenge, we got a nice signal on Halliburton. The ATR method knocked us out on the time stop, and it ended up ultimately just going into a beautiful trend. But they have not weakened. We could see a signal out of CSX today, as I mentioned, but with earnings up, nothing that would be very very playable there for it. You can see Chevron here today. Big push on down. Here on a downgrade. We see Dollar General just kind of fading a little, nothing too exciting there on it. We have Disney, which we talked about. This could be a new signal here today. And again, that's not very uncommon to see, right? When we see the signals, we'll oftentimes see, a stock trigger a bunch in a short period of time. And and go from there. Meaning, if it doesn't rally on the first crossover, we get another crossover. Oftentimes we will see new signals come in. Emerging markets, nowhere that close, to a new signal here. EOG, kind of like the rest of the energy names. EWW, nowhere close. There, EWZ, nowhere close. But finally getting some downside action. Now, take a look at some of the autos. Ford, we see the nice downside that it's had here. Finally, a little bit of pullback. An upside move here from Ford would give it a higher low. And, probably create a trigger just looking at everything else. But one of the things that's kind of close, but then Facebook, just like a lot of the other tech. Freeport consolidating here like a lot of the other kind of multinationals, but this has finally had a downside 3-7 crossover, and that downside crossover that we saw on it did not create a bearish trigger, but it does set it up for a possible bullish trigger on the next upside crossover. So FCX is on that, hey, you know what, this could be very close list here. FedEx, we saw earnings on FedEx, and it's had a little light volume, kind of light volume rally to the upside. This is one that we're probably not going to see an upside signal given the nature of how it is traded of late. But if you look at things that could trigger bearish, FedEx on a downside crossover. I'd be kind of surprised if it doesn't trigger bearish, on a downside crossover given the overall setup there. So that's one that's kind of in that more bearish camp here. Here's gold. Just kind of, this is one of those that last challenge, we got two nice signals come into play, but the move was just a little bit, outside the ATR method. It's been a beautiful trend, and, ultimately the algorithm nailed the trend, but, the ATR, kind of that safety mechanic, did not allow for us to ride it. General Motors, it's kind of been like Ford, just down, down, down. If it does decide to turn around here, we could be talking about something different. But, GM's a little bit different chart than Ford in terms of, lower highs and potentially lower lows coming into play here. With it, Halliburton, already talked about that one. Here's Home Depot. We've seen, crossover action, upside, downside, upside, downside. It's in a very high consolidation period right now. But take a look at this volume that we saw in December on Home Depot. There was monster volume on this uptick. And that wasn't one of the biggest upticks for Home Depot, but the volume was very strong there on it. And oftentimes, after a big volume period, we will see a nice trend emerge. The upside volume suggests it would be to the upside, but we do have, some of the big downside here in November off of the earnings. So we'll see how that kind of plays on out here. Very interested to see, what the next signals are on that. Honeywell, nothing close to a signal there. IBM, this is one that, has finally had a little bit of downside action. We could see an upside crossover come in. This is one that's, close in terms of, could trigger at any moment. Where, you can see a lot of these. There's no chance of triggering, just like normal. But the FCX, the IBMs of the world, the FedExes of the world, could have a trigger sometime here, sooner than later. Coca-Cola had a downside crossover on it on Friday and didn't trigger bearish. And all that means is consolidation risk is high. And this has been a nice upward trender overall. But nowhere really that close to creating a signal there with it. Las Vegas Sands, MGM, a lot of similarity with with those particular stocks here. So, you can kind of see as we scroll through, you have the Microsofts, looks like Apple, looks like Facebook, right? Nowhere close to a trigger because of the crossovers. We have Micron with nice upside action today, but Micron's moving more than average two ranges on this move, so there's no chance of triggering with that. Netflix is one I would love to play. We saw the trigger come into it at the same time we saw Starbucks and Disney, but went with Starbucks and Disney because Netflix options, weren't in our price range for the challenge start. Netflix had a beautiful reversal yesterday, getting a little pullback today, but that bullish signal is still intact here with it. Nike, it's kind of been on a nice run since the gap up that we saw early December there. Oracle, this is one that did see a 3-7 crossover this week, but did not qualify as a bullish trigger. It's a lot of consolidation, elements there in it. Procter & Gamble, you can see, has finally had a nice little pullback. We could see an upside crossover come into it, and that would be rather bullish. Starbucks, this has kind of gone the way of Honeywell, right? And this is one we were forced out of on our stop yesterday. It's continuing to weaken significantly here today. And one that, the next upside crossover could easily trigger bullish, but this downside crossover is not triggering bearish. You can see, even in the Stoke 39.1, it's trading near the upside of its upside of its range overall. Okay, so those are a few stocks that are on the watch list here. Kind of what they're doing. Walmart, I'm very interested to see this pullback, how it plays out. This is one that could easily trigger bullish on an upside crossover, but it's not doing it. U.S. Steel has had a steep, sharp pullback here. One that on the next 3-7 crossover, chances are very slim of qualifying as an upside signal. One of the things you can see with U.S. Steel, and if you take a look right back here, 3-7 upside crossover on a big up day after a pullback, right? But look how far it is from the 20-day moving average. Rarely, and if you go and look at the signals, rarely do we get a signal when a stock is dramatically below the 20-day moving average. That's very tough to get one. That is an element that is built into the algorithm, and simply because the odds of some sort of pullback after a sharp rally are much higher when the stock is significantly below the 20. And, it is something where, rallies, they tend to happen after 3-7 crossovers and moves back above the 20. It's not always that clean, but that is one of the filter factors that the algorithm does have in play here. So anyway, those are a few of the charts that are out there. Twitter with an upside crossover on the 3-7 today. This is one that could trigger here today. I didn't talk about it on the scan, but it is one that could possibly trigger. Very interested to see. Those were some ugly earnings that we saw back in October, and we're back, kind of back into that gap area. I know a lot of traders like, oh, we got to fill the gap. We got to fill the gap. I don't think it's going to fully fill the gap, but a little bit more, yeah, it could. It easily could. Under Armour was hit hard on a downgrade yesterday. It wasn't really a downgrade. It was J.P. Morgan who, essentially has not been talking about the stock because they've been on a restrictive period. Came out and put a neutral rating on them after having a buy rating on them before their restriction period there. So that prompted quite a bit of selling yesterday in Under Armour. All right, so that's where a bunch of the stocks are. You can see we have about 8 to 10 that are semi close to triggering. We have about 3 or 4 that could trigger as early as today, and the rest, they need to do a few things in the next few days to really come close to a trigger, and then some others that just simply aren't even close, aren't going to trigger in the next couple weeks, and that's very normal for the watch list and the positioning of where things are with the watch list right now is very normal and very much what I expect to see at any given period of time. All right. Thanks for hopping on. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you this afternoon. Take care.